Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Natalie Portman. Seriously, there is no Todd and Wes. It's been her the whole time. She's just that good. Let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome everybody to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Lady Whistledown Society Papers. Spotted, the hard-hitting journalism of the elite dating lives with a side of sass. We implore you to pick up the latest Lady Whistledown Society Papers. Welcome everybody to The Pestle. I am Wes.
I don't understand. And I'm Todd. I forgot for a second.
And confused.
One day I gotta ask you where you get these. Do you make these up?
No, there's definitely a running theme behind every single, except for one of them. One of them does not follow the theme, but every other one runs in a very specific set of rules that I live by. That
you're not going to share, because why would you?
Why would I? It's an Easter egg.
It's been 150 episodes now, so
there's plenty
might
of
as well just keep it going.
Info on it if you were to piece it together by now.
Yeah, you should go back and listen to just the beginning of every single one of them. Okay, what? And piece it together.
Oh, yeah, that's my own psychosis kind of popping out here.
I like it. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, we got a lot to cover today. So if actually one tiny tidbit. Did you know that my favorite graffiti in Austin was the Never Give Up graffiti that was hanging on the train that was painted over the train tracks? Yeah, that got covered up. Someone, they call it a toy whenever someone makes terrible graffiti. And so someone put a toy over it and just completely jacked it up. And so, and when that happened, it was very upsetting. And I use that very lightly, but it sent me down this course of figuring out who was behind it in the first place. And there's this really great article that our local newspaper did on the person who made that. And it was kind of wild hearing about how he had to make it, because it's in a very difficult place to get to. And so he kind of had to break out rope climbing gear and dangle over the side of a bridge while he made it. It was pretty dangerous. And he wasn't even living in Austin at the time. Originally he had painted something, he'd put something up there, and the city of Austin painted over that. And so he was living out of state, and he found out about it. He decided to fly back over the course of a weekend, just to put up a new one, which became the Kung Fu grip style and spray painting. Yeah. And so it's a really incredible story. I'll link it in the show notes, but I'm hoping that he comes back and puts something else up.
I was just gonna say,
because that's it makes it more fun at the end of the day. But that was by far my favorite graffiti in town, and there's a lot of really fun graffiti for sure. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I feel like it's a little on the nose for everything that's happening in Austin right now. I feel like Austin, there's a lot of stuff that's really screwing up the city and the vibe and the beauty of what brought me here in the first place. Yeah. So that's par for the course for what I think is happening right now.
Well said. I completely agree.
That sucks.
Nice.
Anyway.
Yeah. What are we going to cover today?
All right.
Uppers?
Yeah, so today we are covering Goodwill Hunting. So if you haven't seen that 1997 masterpiece, go ahead and pause this episode and watch that, because we're going to give away a lot of spoilers and details that you otherwise might enjoy had you not listened to us blabber about it for an hour.
For surezies. Going to touch on a few things, and probably more than that once we really dive into it, but definitely going to talk a lot about the story and writing, Boston as a character itself, and how this is a character-driven film versus a plot-driven film. And we'll also discuss the climax and the ending, as well as mood and music and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. Will Hunting, a janitor at M.I.T, has a gift for mathematics, but needs help from a psychologist to find direction in his life. Directed by Gus Van Sant, written by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, cinematography by Jean-Yves Escoffier, starring Robin Williams as Sean, Matt Damon as Will Hunting, Ben Affleck as Chuckie, Casey Affleck as Morgan, Stellan Skarsgard as Lambeau, and Minnie Driver as Skylar.
If you don't love me, you should just tell me,
I'm
because
not
it's
saying
such
I
a...
don't love you.
Then why? Why won't you come? What are you so scared of?
What am I so scared of?
Well, what aren't you scared of? You live in this safe little world where no one challenges you, and you're scared shitless to do anything else. Because
Don't
that
tell
won't
me
mean that
about
you
my
have to
world. Don't
change.
tell me about my world. I mean, you just want to have your little fling with, like, the guy from the other side of town. Then you're going to go off to Stanford. You're going to marry some rich prick who your parents will approve of, and just sit around with the other trust fund babies and talk about how you went slumming too once.
Why are you saying this? What is your obsession with this money? My father died when I was 13, and I inherited this money. You don't think every day I wake up and I wish that I could give it back, that I would give it back in a second if it meant I could have one more day with him? But I can't, and that's my life, and I deal with it. So don't put your shit on me when you're the one that's afraid.
I'm afraid. What am I afraid of? What the fuck am I afraid of?
You're afraid of me. You're afraid that I won't love you back. You know what? I'm afraid too. Fuck it, I want to give it a shot, and at least I'm honest with you.
I'm not honest with you?
No, what about your 12 brothers? No, you're not going. You're not leaving.
What do you want to know? What? That I don't have 12 brothers?
Yeah.
That I'm a fucking orphan? No,
Yeah.
you don't want to hear
I
that.
didn't know
no,
that.
you don't want to hear that. You don't
I
want to hear
didn't
that I
know
got
it.
fucking cigarettes put out of me when I was a little kid.
I didn't know
that this isn't fucking surgery, that the motherfucker stabbed me. You don't want to hear that shit, Skylar.
I
don't
do wanna
don't
hear
tell
that.
me you want to hear that
I
shit.
want to hear it because I want to help you, because I want
Help
to be
me?
with
What the fuck? What do I got? A fucking sign on my back that says save me?
No.
Do I look like I need that?
No, God, I just want to be with
Don't
you because
bullshit
I
me.
love you.
Don't bullshit me.
I
Don't you
love
fucking
I love you.
bullshit me.
I love you. I want to hear you say that you don't love me. Because if you say that, then I won't call you. And I won't be in your life.
I don't love you.
Yelling scenes in films can be hard, especially in a drama, actually, just because you run a real risk of being just melodramatic for the sake of itself. And so you have to kind of earn those moments. And what makes that a particularly good moment is not just all the build up to it, you know, all the dodging that Will has been doing their entire time together. But it's Minnie Driver's, you know, performance and how we're living through her reaction, the surprise and, like her face, like everything she's doing in her face is just completely heartbreaking. And we're identifying with her, as much as we're, you know, upset or our hearts are breaking for Will. Like it's such a good contrast and combination because, this is all new information from her and Will's over here just throwing it at her instead of like sharing it. You know, it becomes a weapon for him. As a part of, you know, what we find out, I think in the next scene where him and Sean kind of discuss, like, have their breakthrough, so to speak. Yeah. Anyway, are you a fan of this movie, or is this just
this is
like
a great movie, man?
Yeah.
This is a great movie all around. And it's so intriguing, you know, watching this as a, you know, starting point for such huge name actors, you know, going back and watching this again and realizing, okay, they wrote this, like they, you know, they sat down and together crafted what I would call, you know, like a masterpiece, you know, more or less, right? At least in some regards. Yeah. And, they made their own way, you know, which is awesome. I think they can they wrote it from a place that they could identify with, you know, very well. Right. And I think it really shows. That scene in particular, I mean, was very on character, I think, like, and that's part of why I think that they can get away with the yelling, because I totally agree with you. Like, yelling in films, like, you also, yes, run the risk of being melodramatic just for the sake of it, but also overacting. It's very easy to just okay, I'm just going to yell, but forget my purpose. I'm just going to be as loud as I can, right? Well, no, you have to have purpose behind your yelling, right? Or else it's just yelling. And I think that they pulled that off really well because by setting up the fact that Will is a fighter, right? He's, we basically opened the movie with him fighting, right? And throughout the whole thing, he's like looking for fights. He picks fights, whether it's, verbally or physically. And with Skylar, he can't verbally fight. He can't mentally fight with her, right? Like she's brilliant herself. Maybe not on par with him, but when it comes to discussion and stuff, I think probably not math or anything, but like, just communication.
Which is, but also, to your point, is demonstrated when they're at the cafe and he starts to try to pin her down. Like, what does that mean? A guy like me? And she calls him on it. She's like, a guy that spends his time drinking and working in construction. That's who.
Yes. Yes. I know you. I see you. Yeah. I'm going to let you know that. But he can't fight with her mentally and he can't fight with her physically. I mean, he does push her against the wall, I guess. And I remember when I watched that, I was like, whoa, okay, what's going on? But he can't physically do anything. So all he has is his volume. That's all he knows, right? It's either fighting or getting beat up or picked on physically, or it's verbally being yelled at. And so he's kind of giving her back what he got a lot of growing up. So I think it's warranted. And I think his acting screams that, I mean, he was probably pretty green doing this movie, so I'll bet there's a lot of direction in that. But I don't know, maybe not, because he's just a great actor anyway. So
yeah, and so people may forget, like a few years before this, he had a really big role in another film called School Ties, opposite Brendan Fraser. And what I didn't realize though was both Cole Hauser, who plays one of his buddies, and Ben Affleck are both in that as well, and that just kind of blew my, because I recently watched that, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I was just like, whoa, that's the almost the whole gang. Casey Affleck is the only person missing here.
Yeah
Crazy.
Which I also love that Casey's in this film too, and he's little brother, and Jenny watched this with me too. Jenny's my wife, watched it with me too, and the moment at the end where Will is not there anymore and Casey jumps in the front seat, Jenny was like, oh, that's his little brother. Oh. She just like wept. So anyway, that's a great scene. I'm glad you picked that. I think that Minnie Driver just destroys her role in this as well. I think she's fantastic. She sells it. I love her during this whole movie. She's so cool, and she has a great sense of humor, which guys love. I mean, she's just she's brilliant, like the whole package, right? Yeah. And she's everything that we want to shake Will and tell him, what are you doing, man? Don't screw this up, right? And that's the point. We want to feel this. It's not just another girl. It's something more. It's something special, something that like not just Will, but a lot of us would look for as males or as females, whatever, would look for in a mate, right? Someone that gets us, that understands us, that sees us, that's hilarious and fun to be around, that also can be loving and all the things. And she delivers like in spades for sure.
100%.
And we haven't even gotten to Robin Williams.
Oh yeah, what do you think about like Sean, played by Mr. Williams? Because this is the end of our little trilogy of Robin Williams films, and he plays a much bigger part than in these last couple films, and so how does he sit with you in this?
I mean,
a softball, that's just a t-ball right there.
Yeah, it's just a softball of softballs, right? It's a wiffle ball is what it is. He is the movie.
Yeah.
Replace anyone else.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
It's very hard to play. It's very hard to be, I would imagine, I've never had to do it, but I could imagine it'd be very hard to play a therapist in a film. A therapist that's supposed to have a breakthrough with someone who is impossible to break through. and be believable for us, the viewer, because you kind of like Skylar, where we want, the movie wants us to love her. The movie also wants us to want to open up to, what's Robin Williams' character again? I forget. Sean. To open up to Sean. So it's very hard. I mean, you kind of have to already have that established the first time you see him. And one of the only ways, or one of the best ways to do that, is for it to already be an actor that you know and love. Vin Diesel in this film, not so much. He could be the best actor in the world, but I'm not like gonna want to spill my beans to Vin Diesel. So yeah, he destroyed it. I think that specifically, obviously, the scene that he probably won the award for, the scene in the park, is one of the best monologues ever. And it's so simple. That moment it's like basically a oneer. It's pretty much a oneer. There's like a couple of lines towards the end where they cut from or whatever, but the whole thing is basically a oneer. And I love how they set it up too. If I could just talk to that for just a second, you basically have two shots, three if you count the end, but the end is just the same as the beginning, right?
More or less, yeah. We have our establishing that's wide. It's just a basic quick master to establish when the park, and then we're looking at Will as he's establishing his personality once again, being an ass. He's like, "Oh, you have a swan fetish or whatever," joke he makes. Do we need to spend some time about that? And then, boom, like you said, we are on Robin, Sean, as he delivers this 4.5 minute monologue. Like, that's a long section of him just.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that it's the establishing, like you said, but then we are not in a space anymore. Mm-mm. It's full frontal, in their face. All you see is face, right? They're super close up. There is no one around us. There could be 100 people around us, but there is no one around us. Yeah. There are not even ducks. There's not a pond. There's no grass. They're not sitting on a bench. It's literally just face. They don't allow, and that's part of the thing that's beautiful about it, they don't allow any interruption or any way that you could possibly be taken out of the moment. There are other monologues that you see sometimes where, you can see stuff around the person, or you hear something or whatever. There's little things that are distracting, but they made sure there's nothing distracting here. And it was beautiful and perfect. And then the last shot at the end where it's just Will sitting there and Sean is gone, right? First we establish them both, and then we see them talk, and then it's just Will alone. It's a perfect scene. And I think that monologue is so beautiful because it's something that I don't think that, you even have to sit down and really memorize. Like think about it in terms of being an actor and having a monologue. And this is probably not a good monologue to do because everybody knows it. But if nobody did know this, you could probably sit down and just think about that feeling and say similar words. It might not be exact, but you'd say similar words and similar feelings. Like if you went through war and somebody, if you were in Sean's place, right? And I think that you come up with that. And that's what makes it brilliant, is that it doesn't feel scripted. It doesn't feel like something where, oh, I'm an actor and I've memorized these lines. It feels like something that a normal person that was smart and with it and wanted to help someone else would say. And of course he just delivers it, incredibly. And, yeah, he's fantastic in the film. I mean, when he gets mad, you believe him. When he's sad, you believe him. When he's laughing, you're laughing with him. It's perfect. Just perfect.
Yeah, and just to linger a little bit more on that park monologue, because it's the best part of the entire movie. I mean, I love this entire movie, but it's just so absolutely magical. But just a couple notes, like Will, I think it's important that he starts with the jokes, because we need to establish that he's still trying to wrestle control away from Sean. But as we dial in on Sean, as we do that long, slow take, that is a wonder. This isn't like we're not cutting around in order to get the best of Robin Williams. No, Robin Williams sat there and freaking delivered. But it's important because Sean gently takes control of the whole relationship, which Will initially is like kind of talking a little bit, right? After he makes his jokes, Sean starts asking him questions. You've probably never been out of the country or whatever he says. And he's like, nope, but as the more Sean talks, the quieter Will gets. And by the end, he is speechless and he is just left to kind of sit there and ponder his life and what he wants to do next. And I think you're right for a number of reasons about that monologue being perfect and being, easy to memorize to some extent, is because it builds so organically. It builds on one thing after another, and it has this very simple setup and payoff, because Sean begins by admitting to Will, like, hey, you got in my head. I thought a lot about what you said to me, and then something occurred to me, and then I just slept peacefully. And here are the thoughts. And so you have this kind of tease at the beginning, like, I had a thought after you destroyed me that allowed me to get to rest peacefully. And here's what occurred to me. And he just builds on this, all of his experience. Here's all the things I've experienced that you have never experienced. And there's something interesting about that whole sequence, because there's this, I don't know if you want to call it a philosophical question, that's called the problem with Mary's room. And this is recently been, used in the idea about artificial intelligence. But you could use this in a lot of circumstances. And the idea is this: there's a girl named Mary, and she's stuck in this black and white room. But within this room, she has all the knowledge she could possibly need to understand everything about color. She understands, how many colors there are, the way your light, reflects into your eyes, and how many cones there are in your eye, and the wavelengths of every single color, and how it impacts everything about life. And so there is not a single thing you could tell Mary about color that she doesn't already know. Nothing. Yet, when she walks out of her black and white room and then she sees color for the first time, she sees a red apple. Has she learned anything new? And so it's asking this very simple question about experience. Like, does experience bring something new to you that you otherwise could never learn through any amount of information, any amount of data? And that's very effectively what Sean is trying to get at with Will. He's trying to communicate something so simple that you think you know everything, and to some degree maybe you do, but because you have yet to experience any of it, it's just data. It doesn't matter, and it holds no weight, not only with me, but with the rest of the world either, because right now you're just sitting in timeout. And it becomes kind of a very establishing way of getting inside Will's head for us, the audience too. If you allow yourself to think about it, the film is very deft at just kind of moving you through his world. But if you really begin to understand the way he operates in his life, you'll begin to understand why he's afraid of experience, because of course all his early childhood experience was very unhealthy. And so, yeah. And just as another side note, there's several of these really long monologues throughout the film. We not only have this one, of course, we have the one with Ben Affleck whenever Chuckie goes to be like his business associate in that meeting,
So good.
which is hilarious. It's perfect. But then you also have the other one with Will, as he's talking about his job interview, and he's just pointing out 1,000 reasons why he shouldn't take that job. And so what's important about those from a cinematography standpoint is, your team has to be on point, because these long, slow moves also mean you have to be flawless if you're going to keep the entire take. You can't jumble the camera or screw up the focus too badly. You got to be really, really well on top of it, which also encourages you to simplify the shot where you can in order to minimize the risk of screwing up the take, because that's the last thing you want to do is have Robin Williams deliver an Oscar-worthy performance, and then your first AC is like, can I get one more for safety? Like, no, you asshole. Yeah. Anyway, continue.
What'd you think of? What'd you think of the film?
Oh man,
how's your feeling?
So
now?
For me, this is a perfect movie, and I'm not saying it should be that way for everybody. But for me and what I want out of a movie, I think this is a perfect film. Like, there's nothing I would change. And it's not that there isn't superfluous elements to the film. Like, if it kind of gets at the heart of the film, this is a character-driven film instead of a plot-driven film. Like, there's really no plot per se. I mean, even that synopsis that you read is pretty kind in its summary.
Yeah.
Like, it's a story about a troubled kid, and we're just kind of dipping into his world. And that's not to say that scenes don't have a purpose. Don't mistake those two things. A scene can have a purpose without being meaningful to the plot. They're all there to kind of add context and texture to Will's life, and sometimes just as a means of building depth of our relationship to these characters. Like, if you look at the bar scene between Will introducing Skylar to his friends, you have this silly joke or story that Chuckie's telling everybody about his dad. That joke has absolutely no bearing on the plot or the progression of this film. Like, we could have easily have just jumped to a montage of them all hanging out together. But instead, what it does give you is buy-in to their relationship. We're now having Skylar becoming a part of his life as he's introducing someone to his friends. And now when that scene ends and we're kind of feeling that ripped away, there's an emotional, pull on at the audience. And so there's emotional reasons for that story, even though there's no plot-driven reasons for that story. And that's a important distinction, I think, because it can be very tempting to only want to ever focus on plot. And that's just not what this movie. And so, yeah, for me, this is a perfect movie because I love conversation and discovery of people, and this film is all about that. It's all about discovering Will, and not just him though. We discover Sean and his relationship with Lambeau. We discover Skylar. Slowly. We don't know that the only reason she can afford Harvard is because her dad passed away when she was 13. I don't get the impression that Will even knew that. Because right before that, he's talking about, and you'll marry the guy your parents are happy with. And it's like, she doesn't have her parents. She has maybe one parent. And so, I love all the discovery of and texture and the camaraderie. And I love the recognition of Sean trying to school Lambeau, who is a great character. Lambeau is such a good character, and he provides so much opportunity for frustration and, a way to demonstrate and fight for Will through a well-meaning dad, right? He's kind of, the parents are fighting again. He's the dad that is just a jerk and is just trying to get his son to do the right thing. And, Sean is the mom that's, fighting for the emotional wealth and stability of her kid. Yeah. I don't know, man. None of this is even remotely touching, all the notes and stuff. But so for me, this just works on every level, man.
So who do you side with? Do you side with one or the other?
Very much Sean. Like, I would think, if I had kids, that I really wouldn't care what it is they pursued as long as they loved it. I feel like that's kind of
what if they pursued nothing?
Yeah, that would probably bother me. Like,
that's the point.
Yeah, that's true.
That's hard.
It is hard. I would say that if I sensed that there was something wrong emotionally, that was the reason they weren't like trying something in life, then I would probably, start trying to help them through that. But if it was like this completely healthy kid that was just not doing anything with their life, I would probably be a lot more like Lambeau, where I'm just like, no, hey, you need to get out. And at that point, I'm probably the hard ass where I'm like, no, you're out of the house. Go figure it out. I don't care. Go fail. Go be homeless. Like, you're going to figure something out. And I mean, I got all of those things. Frankly, I'm not saying I had a very healthy childhood. I relate to Will in so many ways. But at the same time, like, my mom never like challenged me whenever I was pursuing something. Like, it was always, hey, I love sports. I love music. I love writing. Like, it was always encouragement, or at least, at worst, antipathy. Like, it was just like, fine, cool, just whatever, but I was never condemned for it. Whereas, and I was also like, hey, you got to figure it out. Like, all my life has been like me figuring it out more or less, on my own, with the help of friends for sure, but I've never had much in the way of like fallback. Like, there's been very rare times whenever I even tried to use fallbacks. And it's been good. You need that in life if you're doing what I do and just abandoning all and going for it. But you try to reduce those when you can.
Which is honorable, by the way. That's like something pretty badass about like just saying, fuck it. I'm doing what I want to do no matter what, come hell or high water.
And I think that's what Will, if we're going to like just imagine what comes next for Will, there's a magic to where he came from, because he had nothing. Like, he had nothing to miss. He has nothing to fear, because if you go and you go get some $83,000 job that allows you to, parse code for the Department of Defense or whatever, and you're not happy with that, who cares? Quit. Go couch surf or whatever. There's nothing that you can do to terrify Will. And I think that's his secret weapon that he is yet to utilize. Nothing can like knock the seed out from under him anymore. He's experienced the worst that life has to throw at him. Yeah. That's,
I mean, I identify with both, right? This is this is the same question we keep asking, right? Like, do you need the asshole in order to get the most out of,
your talent,
some special person, right?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is yes and no, right? Because you're gonna have both, right?
Yeah.
But it's wonderful that he has the choice, right? He has the dad who's pushing him hard, and he has the mom, or vice versa, however you want to say it, the other parent, quote unquote, that is telling him, do whatever you want. You can't get it wrong. And I think that's like, for the first time in his life, he's got both sides in their own way, pushing him in whatever direction. And, obviously Sean wins, if one wins. But it's intriguing because so I think about my kid, right? About my son. And I tell him all the time, I'm like, man, because we do homeschool right now because of COVID until the end of the year, which is so soon. Oh my gosh, it cannot come soon enough. And I tell him, because he's really hard for him to pay attention and really hard for him to do his work and stuff.
Which is why you constantly strike him in the face. Like, I can't believe you do that.
All day. I just tell it, in all seriousness, I tell him, bro, I don't care if you get it wrong. I don't care. Get every question wrong, fine. But if you don't try, that's when I get upset. It's when you don't try. All you got to do is try. If I see you trying, I don't give a shit what happens. I don't say that, but I say I don't care what happens. And I think that's really an important thing. It may be kind of like the balance between Sean and what is it, Lambeau?
Yeah.
Forget names. I'm so bad with names. And Lambeau is that. It's like man, you don't have any idea what you have. So don't squander it. Like, just try. Like, please, if you hate it or fail, who gives a shit? But if you're not trying, then we go over to the side of Sean, and it's like, well, okay, then you haven't experienced life. Yeah. How will you know if you don't try? But at the same time, you don't do something that you hate. So it's kind of like, I mean, I guess I try to teach my son the combination of both. So maybe we need both in this scenario, at least in this movie we do. And it's wonderful to see Will and Lambeau at the beginning really like hitting it off with math. Like, okay, he's found his place, like even Lambeau, pats him on the head.
Which is funny. Will's reaction to that is like, that was a little condescending, but okay, I'll allow it.
I'll allow it. And then he keeps doing it. He like keeps putting his hand on his head. It's like a little far. But even Lambeau's assistant he just rolled his eyes like, oh my God. But yeah, so anyway, I love the development of those relationships, right? Even if it's just slight. Like, that's the only moment you see where Will is like okay with this kind of relationship with Lambeau, is that pat on the head. He doesn't say anything like, hey, it's cool that we're doing math together. Like, he doesn't, it's just he's allowing Lambeau to touch him in that way, because they have this math thing in common. But that's it. And I think it's important to have a little bit, but not too much, because later on when he's hugging Sean, it's like completely, this is my people, or, so.
Totally.
Anyway, you want to hit some of your notes?
Yeah. One other small.
I think you touched on a few of them, but
yeah, I've already kind of. I have a ton of notes that I won't get into just because I took a lot of notes on this film. I didn't expect to. Actually, 20 minutes in, I was terrified. I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to get anything out of this. I'm going to do an entire episode on like one of my favorite movies ever and what I call the perfect movie, and I'm going to have nothing. So like all the terror just hit me. And then at that point I felt like, okay, well, there's nothing left to lose.
There you go. Then you got in the car and you drove across the country.
That's right. I'm on my way to California right now. And so one other note on the cinematography, I love that little slow-mo fight sequence whenever they, attack one of Will's childhood, attackers. And I love it because it's a creative and simple way to kind of stage a fight scene. I'm sure it, in some way served a need on production. Maybe like, hey, we don't know how to like do a really big brawl. Because I think if you start going that direction of, we're going to have like a 5-on-5, all out outsiders fight, then we don't know how to unwind that. Whereas if you kind of do these little vignettes of, oh, there's a little fight over here, there's a moment over here, and you shoot that in slow-mo, I think it eases up the requirements of shooting that kind of scene. Because now, this punch that would otherwise take, 12 frames can now fill out, 5 or 6 seconds. And you only need a handful of those to really sell the sequence. And so figuring it out, and it just looks cool. They do it in this very strange way where it looks like maybe they're shooting it in slow-mo, but they also have the actors moving in slow-mo. And so they kind of ramp in and out of that. And it's just fascinating. I don't know. I don't think I've seen anything else like that before. Yeah. Especially like Casey Affleck's punch whenever we're looking up at him and he does his face, the satisfied, like, yeah, I just got him in the kisser. So,
what is this, the 40s?
Yeah. And so looking at some of the story and writing though, first, I thought it was interesting just to kind of touch on the script as a thing in of itself. So at the beginning of the film, it says that it's written by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. I'll see if I can link something. I don't want to spend too much time on just them creating the script. My roommate is fascinated with the idea that they wrote this through performing it. Like, I don't know that this is true. I couldn't find anything, so take this as apocryphal. But he swears that he saw an interview way back in the day about them discussing how they wrote it. And they would talk about a scene and then act it out, and then write it and then keep acting it out and honing it that way through performing it, instead of just, hey, let's just write the scene. They'd maybe start with a goal or an objective of the scene, and then creatively figure it out, along the way. But I do know that this script started as a project in a screenwriting class in college for Matt Damon. Like, he wrote this, I think it was like 40 pages or something. And then he really liked it and decided to keep developing it. And I think one scene survived intact. Everything else was a complete, do-over. But the other interesting thing was they wrote it, but the ending came from someone else. I forget who it was. Oh, it was Kevin Smith, I want to say. And again, check the show notes. Guys, I'm always screwing stuff up, so I try to fix my mistakes in the show notes. So if you hear me say something stupid, check the show notes just in case I clarify or recant, because I do that every once in a while. And speaking of which, stay tuned for Tree of Life, where I revisit the whole natural light versus available light discussion. Anyway, so Kevin Smith, they approached Kevin Smith and they were like, hey, we have this script. And he's like, hey, this is really good. You need a real director. He just shot himself down. He was like, you need someone who's actually really good.
That's so Kevin Smith.
It's so Kevin Smith. I love that guy.
I love that.
And they went through and, looked for directors and eventually landed on Gus Van Sant, who's incredible. And I think this is our second Gus Van Sant film. Finding Forrester was the other one I think we've done.
Yes.
And so, and so the ending came from him, even though he didn't get a writing credit. And that's an interesting thing about writing credits, is you have to make up a certain portion of the script, whether it's story or the actual screenplay. Like, Kevin Smith never touched the screenplay, and so he couldn't get a screenplay credit. But it wasn't nearly enough I think you have to have a third of the story in order to, get a story by credit. And so in this case, the entire idea and screenplay was both by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. Therefore, they get all the credit, and you can reduce it to a written by credit, which in and of itself becomes this whole thing. Like, when is there a written credit versus a screenplay by credit? It's a thing. Anyway, but I just think it's fascinating, just the way that people do or do not receive credit based on like a chunk of the film. But I think the cooler thing is Kevin Smith really didn't give a shit. He saw a cool story and he's like, hey, here's an idea for you. And they were like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And I think the idea was just, he should leave and go pursue Skylar. That should be the ending of your film. And so anyway, kudos to Mr. Smith for his voice in this film. But Boston as a character is really significant, and just a quick tour through it, like all the locations we kind of hit, because this was filmed both in Boston and in Ontario, Canada. And so not everything was actually shot in Boston, but I think most, if not all, of the exteriors probably were. But, we were at M.I.T, which is the interior shot in Ontario as well, some school up there. But you get this feeling that you're in Boston through the bar, and the use of M.I.T, even if not literally, through the image of it. Like, hey, why did you choose to go to M.I.T? And, this M.I.T professor, and they're constantly invoking M.I.T, which is the most prestigious, technical college in the world. They go to the batting cages. It's a baseball town. And so we do a lot, with baseball, the batting cages, the Little League game, Red Sox footage, discussing, the Red Sox in and of itself. We go to a Harvard bar. We sit in the street side cafe that's in the middle of wherever, Dorchester or wherever they are. We go to this construction site because it's a blue collar town. And so they're constantly lots of street shots. They're driving around town, and the distinct housing style. And so it really sells the location in so many ways, not just, physically, but and spirit by, referencing Harvard and MIT, the accents, of course. And so they're really selling the location and the characters, which grounds us in their world. And I think that's really important, which we'll get to in a few minutes. Another part of the script or the writing was Will as a character is a tough one for so many reasons, because he's not just a math genius. He has all these other elements to him, but as far as his intelligence, he's not just a math genius. And it's funny because the synopsis described him as that, but he's so much more. And so we kind of need to see the extent of his abilities. And so throughout the film, we're constantly getting these demonstrations of his vast intelligence, right? We obviously start with the MIT math puzzle, which puts him on the radar of the professor. But then we drop over to the Harvard bar, where he gives a history lesson to this douchebag, which isn't really even technically a history lesson. It's a book report. And it's so much better than a history lesson because he's dressing down this guy's method of intelligence and showing off, which is this whole bigger esoteric perspective on not just intelligence, but Harvard students as a whole. Like, he's just completely ripping the book cover off this kid. And it's perfect. And the other thing I love about that scene is the douchebag that he's, berating in front of everybody. I love his reaction. He actually gives a really great performance because he just watches. Mm-hmm. He doesn't overreact. And it's so tempting there to try to put on this facade and performance of, oh man, I'm really getting shown up. Instead, he stays in character, and his character is just still superior in his heart. He still thinks he's better than this kid. And it's so good because it just lets Matt Damon say the lines, which is doing all the work. The heavy lifting is already done in the script itself. Just say the lines, just watch him say the lines, and then you're going to say your lines, and the work is done. You don't have to do a damn thing. It's there, and this is very David Mamet. This is a very David Mamet thing to say of me, but I, in this case, completely agree. The lines have done all the heavy lifting. All they need to do is show up and say them. And I think it's perfect.
I totally agree. I noticed that guy in that scene. For whatever reason, I just thought, man, that was really good acting. And I wasn't talking about Ben Affleck.
Yeah.
Like his lack of reaction, as you said, is like perfect. Because what do you do? I mean, you cannot respond to, in reality, right? Not in a movie, but in reality, you can't respond to that. There is no response. And so any kind of emotion or anything means I've succumbed to that person. So you might as well just, okay, I'm going my way. No, I don't want to go outside. We're good.
Yeah, exactly. And that's
Very good point.
He resorts to the one thing that he has, which is class. He resorts to a class fight.
Ah, good point. Yeah.
But then Will resorts to the thing that he has, which is also his class, which is his fists. And that's when he finally walks away. He's like, okay, I think I've thoroughly lost this discussion.
Yes.
I'm gone. And it's, absolutely perfect. And as far as demonstrating the intelligence through the writing, of course, we go to court, where Will makes a very articulate argument to defend himself. And it's very perfect, but of course the judge rips the rug out from under him, which is perfect because it also reveals Will's background as an orphan with a history of abuse. It's very slick exposition through the judge. It's so clever because everything up to that point could be making you believe that, oh, Will's about to use his wit once again to get off the hook. And instead, the judge acknowledges his history, and he's like, I can see why everyone lets you off the hook all the time. Because of your rap sheet and your background. It's building a very quick and easy mental image of who Will is that fits right in line with everything we've experienced about him up until that point. But then, as the judge would do, it's like, but in this case, you hit a cop, you're going to jail. Doom, like you're gone. Oh, it's very smart though. I love the way they slip in the exposition through that scenario. Incredibly smart.
And his response is actually pretty interesting too. Just, thank you, sir. He says something like that. Just like almost like he expected it.
Yeah.
Or whether he expected it or not, he's just like, okay, that's it. It's done. It's over. And I think most people would be like, at least have some kind of emotion or or like I don't know,
Begging
something,
or
but not.
whining.
I mean, it was immediate. It was straight like all right, we're done. Let's go.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, you're right, because he kind of he's like, okay, I played my cards. I didn't win. That's fine. Let's go.
yeah.
So good. And then, of course, we also, what's funny after that, in terms of Will's character, is he uses his one phone call to call Skylar. Like,
Yeah.
it builds a lot of depth in his character to say that he's reckless, but you know what? He's also kind of charming. Like, that's a ballsy thing to do. Because what has he got? He's just like, whatever comes. And then we see another demonstration of intelligence through therapy. Like, and this is important because up until this point, we've definitely seen him like use his actual intelligence through knowledge, books. But in this case, we start to see something else, which is he reads the therapist's book, right? And then he reads the subtext, because Will isn't just like a numbers freak or an information freak. He's emotionally intelligent. And so he gets in the room and then he calls out the therapist, right? Shakes him, calls him out for being, potentially gay. And that creates a whole chain reaction that gets exactly what Will wants, which is out of the room. Like you said it really well earlier. He goes around looking for fights, and this is just easy pickings. I have a therapist who thinks he's here to like uncover everything about me. Well, I'm going to uncover everything about them instead. And so from that first guy, we go to the next guy who's a hypnotherapist. And of course, Will humiliates him, and rightly so. But then
I had Afternoon Delight in my head the rest of the night. Just by the way.
It does not go away.
Yeah, no.
Is that what you call a earworm?
Yes.
And then, of course, finally he runs into a brick wall, which is Sean. Especially that first meeting, because Will does what he does with the other therapist, and he tries to pick them apart. And Sean simply does not accept this. Your armchair analysis is not going to go well. He doesn't just storm out. Instead, he violently chokes him, which is not technically good therapy practice, or normal.
Yeah, no.
As you might, anticipate. And so, that kind of shakes Will for sure. And of course, it shakes Sean as well, because he's like, no. I'll take him. We're going to work through this. And it kind of brings him back to life, because as we learn, Sean is reeling from the death of his own wife, and dealing with his own emotional problems, which is always good in a therapy film, which is a thing. You do want that. You want to see not just the person in therapy getting healed, but you want to see the therapist himself dealing with his own demons. And so that's a very significant and intelligent approach to this. And then, we see it other demonstrations of intelligence throughout the film, like at a glance, right? He does Skylar's homework, her chemistry homework. Are you mad? No one reads chemistry for fun. And so, etc. But I think that'll, bring us to the whole idea that this is a character-driven film. So normally, if you wanted to turn this into a plot-driven film, you might turn it into, how can Will get out of legal trouble? And then it becomes, a question of him trying to balance all these things. Can he balance his job versus his therapy versus the math stuff? And you could still have tons of drama through that, but we don't care about that. Like, that's only lightly invoked at the end of the film. Like, once we establish everything and why he's doing what he's doing, like, that doesn't come until like the very end of the film, where Lambeau's like, hey, if he misses another one, like, I can't be held responsible if he lands him back in jail. Like, that's been so far from our mind. Another avenue, I guess, if you were going to make this a plot thing, would be him chasing Skylar, like trying to win the girl. And that's not really there. We just kind of spend time with them. And so instead, this is character driven, which I think could probably, depending on the film, show up in a variety of ways. But in this case, I think we go and do things based on Will's decisions, not to advance a plot, but to advance character and advance depth. So in order to do that, we often put Will in situations to see how he responds, or just to experience, his worldview. And so, for instance, he goes on a successful date, but does he follow up? No. In fact, before he has the conversation with Sean, he goes out in the rain and he makes that phone call, and he hangs up, doesn't even try. And then, of course, he lies to his friends about it, right? He's like, I forgot the number. If there's one thing Will Hunting is not going to do.
Forget a number.
Never. And so, that's laughable on its face, of course. But then we jump into therapy and find out the real reason is that he's terrified that he's going to find out that she's not perfect and he's not perfect. And it's going to ruin this thing. And it's this fear. But what's so cool about that is after talking to Sean, what's he do? He goes to her place, to see Skylar again and to give it a shot. He takes a risk. And it's so important because we see Sean's effect on Will. We have a very simple test. And it's such a great, beautiful, simple, subtle way to test characters against each other. And to see the effect that Sean is actually having on Will. To see that Will is abandoning, you have to demonstrate that first. You have to demonstrate that he's giving up on Skylar. And then you get an opportunity to see Sean give him advice and him to take it. He goes and follows up and he takes a shot. And it's simple. It's a simple way to demonstrate whether or not therapy is having an effect on Will. Because beforehand, you might think, this guy is never going to take therapy seriously. He's never going to give it a shot. But we build in these little tests that give us an opportunity to see Will grow. And then, as far as being a character-driven thing, we also see how characters who try to push Will, who try to push him into a narrative, right? Right now, we're living in almost a narrative-free life in this movie. But every time these characters try to push him into a narrative, it doesn't go well, right? They get frustrated. Lambeau is a complete failure in trying to propel Will to get a job or to help with his math research even. Like, Will is so lackadaisical in it. And by the end of it, right, he's just like, this is child's play. Do you know how simple this is to me? It's embarrassing. And similar, like Skylar fails to try to get Will to move in with her, to move across the country with her. Like, these are all very movie things. Like, we're trying to get Will to participate in being in a movie, and he just refuses to. And I think it's just doubling down on the idea that this is not that kind of movie, that this is a character-driven piece. In order to have any satisfaction with that, well, let's take a look at that. And so let's talk about the climax and the ending. And I think it arrives through largely Sean and Gerald Lambeau. Like, throughout the film, we kind of slowly get this inkling of their history, and it just completely builds slowly until it erupts at the very end there, right before Will walks in on mom and dad having their big fight. And I love it because it helps add an emotional climax to the film itself, right? Because at this point, Skylar's left, right? And Will has just watched her walk away. He refuses to admit that he loves her, but he won't deny it either. And so she's leaving, and it's so good because we're kind of watching her at the airport, watching for him. But we'll talk about that in a second. And so we watch her leave. We hear Chuckie admit that he wants Will to succeed and freaking leave. You can't be successful and still be where he is. Chuckie even knows that. And then, of course, we have the big emotional breakthrough when Sean, learns more about Will's childhood, and we start to put a much clearer face on that through that just brutal story of he would put down, a branch, belt, and a wrench, and I love that so much. And he's like, and Sean's like, got to go with the belt, and Will's like, no, the wrench. Because fuck him, that's why. Like, no one's going to hold anything over me. And it's perfect. And so that's when we have this big breakthrough moment, right? The acknowledgement, and it's so good because Will already knows. He's like, is it all those things, detachment disorder and all that garbage? And Sean's like, yeah, you know what it is. you know? And that, I think, kind of brings us back a little bit to the whole problem with Mary's room is now Will is experiencing what it means to kind of give into his emotions a little bit and to stop. I don't know that he's been holding Sean at a distance, but to some degree he's been not letting him in the whole way. And so I think it's perfect. Because throughout the film, what we're really looking for is for Will to drop his defenses and to have a moment of catharsis. Like he refuses to be honest with Skylar until he explodes. He just completely detonates on her, which is not cathartic. Like this is once again, using your past as a weapon. And instead, Will's actual breakthrough has an emotional breakthrough in that moment with Sean. But what I find interesting about that is our climax is emotional catharsis through the crying and Sean making sure he knows, hey, this isn't your fault, etc. But what I think his actual victory is leaving town to chase Skylar. I think that's his actual victory. We don't see that until the very final scene, the credits, and it's important because this is him doing what he could not do before, which is to be vulnerable by leaving his comfort zone. Because Boston, and this goes back to Boston as a character, because Boston was such a character in this film, it carries so much more weight to see him driving away. And I think that is so absolutely perfect as a usage of, your city as a character, as a way to demonstrate Will has evolved and now he's growing up. He's leaving this safe place that we've all come to kind of know and love and find comfort in. And I think that's just such a beautiful use of a location to demonstrate character growth. Yeah. And so
beautiful.
Yeah.
One of my favorite moments, also besides the obvious moment of the monologue, Sean's monologue, is you mentioned it earlier, the integration of the baseball shots when Sean was telling him when he met his wife. And I think that's when Sean won. Is that story.
Yeah.
That's the moment, because they had already had the whole, like, everything had already gone down between them, and this is the first time. I think it was the scene where Will broke the silence, right? It was in that same session, wasn't it?
Different session. Session 3 was when or session 4 was when he broke the rule, broke the silence with a joke about the airplane. Session 5 was when he told the story about meeting his wife. Okay.
Okay.
I have notes on both.
Because that's good. It's good because there's a lot of them. Because it's Will has a problem, obviously, with fear that people will leave him, fear that he will not succeed, feel that he will fail, but mostly fear that like I said, that people will leave him. And so Sean telling him the story of he had tickets to this iconic game, and obviously he didn't know that Butch was going to hit a home run, but which is hilarious at the end. But it didn't matter what was happening around him. It didn't matter who he was with, where he was going, what they were doing. None of that mattered once he saw what he wanted. And then he dropped everything and he went after what he wanted. He realized in that moment, that's what I want. And so everything I have now doesn't get me what I want. So I'm letting it go. And so Sean became an example of what Will is going to try to do, right? Or like trying to get to. And so I think at that moment, he was like, oh, okay, this guy has done it. And he's given me a life example, a life-changing example of that, which is why he could have that breakthrough at the end where he says it's not your fault. And Will can eventually, not at first, but eventually really believe him and hear what he really is saying, from basically that moment on. But
that's a great observation.
Beautiful moment.
Yeah.
And I love how they sorry to interrupt, but I love how they my point earlier, how they they intertwined all the real footage of the baseball game to really, like, you're in that game with Sean. You're there because you don't know he's not there yet, but he's telling the story like he's there and you're there with him, and we're watching this, and we're all together in Fenway Park. And wait, no, I wasn't there. No, what are you talking about? It was just so beautiful. It's so much better than not having it in there and just him telling a story in the room, you know?
So true. And just because you brought up that scene, I wasn't originally this wasn't part of the notes I was going to include in the show, but since you brought it up, what's also really cool about that scene is we do the establishing shot of that scene through an overhead. We're looking straight down into the room. And that's cool because the room is now becoming a baseball diamond. That's very much reflecting, the story he's going to tell. And what's great about that is as the scene progresses, right, and you see Sean kind of run around the bases, knocking Will over and doing the whole bit. But what's great is when we start that scene, Will starts on one side of the room and he ends at the other. And so effectively, what Sean did was he advanced the runner from first base to third base. And I think it underscores the point you just made, that that's when he won him over. So now he's got him on his team. He's right there. He just needs to bunt him in. Bunt
him home.
Yeah. Yep. And that's at the end, that's all he's doing, right? He's like, hey,
wow, great.
We're not going to
great spot there.
Slam this thing. No, we're just going to kind of gently bring him home. Yeah. And it's pretty cool, man.
So cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So great.
Yeah. So mood and music and direction. I mean, there's just so much to this. I think, so there's this scene after the Harvard bar where they kind of drive home at sunrise and they're playing, I'm assuming that's Elliott Smith, this acoustic, song. It's just this very chill, melancholy vibe. But what it's also doing, it's giving you a vibe, but it's also kind of revealing how aimless their life is. They just kind of spent the whole night doing nothing. Now they're going home, and that's kind of it. That was their night. And so we get it. It's there to give us a sense of the aimlessness of what they're doing in their life. And there's something you said before we hit record that we're about to touch on. But the theme music and the score, not the actual songs, but the score, kind of the theme that's running through the film. It's not very rhythmic, which I really love because it lets you seamlessly transition through moods. So we can start, playing some vibey music after whatever, a date, and then transition that into, a work session at the construction site and end at wherever, a therapy session. Like it allows us to just kind of vibe through the scenes without having to really feel like this is going anywhere. Whenever you get too rhythmic in a score, it kind of creates an expectation in the viewer that, oh, we're going to go somewhere. This is a part of a ride. Whereas if there's no strong rhythm to it, now you can seamlessly transition through these emotional tones. Like you can start with something that feels, sweet and romantic, and then move right into something that feels kind of hopeless and tired. And they do that, throughout the films. I forgot to actually note what those actual transitions are emotionally. But I just remember the first time I watched it, I watched this movie like once or twice a year, so that's hilarious. But for the show, I watched this twice. Once just for me to just kind of hang out in the world, and then the second time to kind of scribble some notes. But I forgot to actually write down what those emotional moods were. As opposed to something that's really cool about the soundtrack and the score as well, I guess, is that it lets us move through these quick sequences without needing to settle in. Without the score, without these music pieces, you get the feeling that, oh, we're going to hang out here for a while. Whereas you can montage a little bit stronger through the use of music. It creates this vibe that creates a connection, a thread through these scenes. And so suddenly, whenever you're hanging out with Will calling Skylar before she leaves for California, right? He's on the phone with her. And then he's saying goodbye and she's saying, I love you. And he's hanging up. Like, it's brutal. And then we just jump straight to the airport. Like, there's no real transition there. It's just her in her apartment or in her dorm room, her at the airport looking for Will while Will is just, at the park hanging out. And then we jump to Will at work while Lambeau is calling, looking for him. And then before we finally settle in at work, like, without the music there, that's just a very weird, jumpy sequence. But with the music, suddenly you're getting the emotional toll that this is all kind of taking on Will. And you're now just kind of sitting in a vibe, and you're montaging through this, and it feels natural. It feels organic, and like it all makes sense. And so using music in that way is very smart and an intelligent way to kind of move the audience through the story without, feeling weird and hoppy. And then I guess lastly, this is more of a directional note. And they do this really well throughout the film, but I love this scene at the end, that same scene that you were talking about where Jenny's like, fucking little brother, where Chuckie goes to Will's empty house to discover Will's gone. My dream is bitterly come to pass. But what I love about this sequence the scene is I love how they really sit on that moment of Chuckie realizing and accepting it and kind of celebrating it. They just let it wash over him as the music lifts us up. And it's so good because it's a very complete scene of him pulling up, walking up to the house, knocking, waiting, knocking, looking through the window, looking through another window, waiting, realizing, enjoying it, smiling, kind of turns finally and starts walking back to the car and kind of shrugs his hands and throws his hands up. And, it's just like, I don't know. Hey. And of course, Chuckie being such an idiot, like he's just happy to get the front seat.
Yeah.
But I
did love that scene. It's so long.
It's so long, but it's so well deserved because it's perfectly set up with that monologue with Chuckie, like describing how much he would hate Will for not cashing in his lottery ticket. So I love just staying there with him because I think if you move through that scene a little too fast, it feels weird and it plays a little too melodramatically. Whereas if you give him that space, you give him that time to churn through those emotions of like, oh, it's happening. And how do I feel about this? I'm happy about this. Like, you don't want to push through those emotions or else you'll just end up cutting the scene altogether. But allowing that scene to play out really earns the Will's moment of leaving town. Like, it makes it official. Like, he's really gone. He's really not coming back. So I love it.
I think a lot of us, I love that reference to a lottery ticket. I think a lot of us have those, and it's hard to see that we do a lot of times. We got a bunch of other shit that comes along with it, of course. But if you had to pull a plot from this, if you had to, because I agree, I think it's a character study. It's less than more than actual plot driven. But if you had to pull something from it, it feels like that might be kind of it. But that's just an ancillary thing that happens just from the progression of the character. But it's not really a story about that. But that is, and that is because of that scene where I would suggest that possibly because. We all like to identify with the main character, even if the main character is like, this like shitty Boston kid who likes to like beat people up, right? Because he's brilliant and we all want to be brilliant, right? So, but that scene specifically, that was like Ben Affleck's moment, right? In the whole film. I mean, he had his monologue when he told Will, you got to get out of here. And that was great. But I think he really solidified his role in the film with that scene, that moment. And that's hard. It's a hard moment to have. It's very, we're both actors and we know how hard it is to like really sell a moment. It's almost like you can't really be in the moment to do it. You have to be outside of whatever is happening in order to really capture it. And it's really hard to do, you know, when you're surrounded by crew and a camera in your face and you have lines, or you're thinking, I got to hit beats, right? It's really, really difficult to do. And I feel like he just completely nailed it. It was wonderful.
He did. And I think what helped him do that was, I think is exactly what you just said. Like, I got to hit my beats because one of my old acting coaches, oh my God, CK McFarlane, we used to love talking about moments of composition. And we discussed this way back on A Quiet Place, coincidentally, because, you know, there's this idea that let me make sure I let this moment settle. Like, he's going through this, I'm waiting for him to just come to the door. So he has to let that moment, if he moves through that moment too quickly, now it's just bad acting. Now it's just like, oh, it's what you would call indicating. Like, you're just indicating where the scene is going and what you're feeling. Instead of, real people need to wait. Real people need to experience like what it means that someone's not coming to the door. And so as an actor, you're making sure you're letting these moments settle on your face and your posture. And then maybe an eye movement. And it is hard, man. Like, you really need to let these moments of composition where you're composing a moment, almost like a picture. You think of your scene, and you know, I don't know if that he would do this, Ben Affleck, but the way I would probably approach something like that is, I think you're right, a little more technically, because I don't know how in the moment I could be by myself going through this motion. Instead, I would think about it in terms of pictures. Okay, I had this first moment of going to the door to get my friend. That's my first picture. My friend isn't coming to the door. That's my second picture. My friend has cleaned his place out. That's my third picture. How do I feel about this? That's my fourth picture. I'm excited. That's my fifth picture. And then the rest of the scene kind of carries you through. And so I'm thinking through all those 4, you know, photographs and, you know, just trying to slowly transition between the two of them. I did this really, Trent Moore, my favorite acting coach actually, would have us do this exercise where you have a monologue and you have to do it, and people are going to laugh because they think it's just stupid. But it's so good and it's so effective. But he was like, I want you to perform this, not exactly interpretive dance, which I know sounds, you know, silly, but through gestures, physical gestures, without saying any words. I want you to think of what's a physical gesture that would, that's very strong and would, you know, determine what would it look like if you were to say, I'm going to the door to get my friend. Okay. Now, what's it feel like when your friend isn't coming to the door? How do you feel? And you literally create this gesture. Maybe that first gesture is you're reaching your hand out. And it doesn't have to be, you know, this pantomime thing where I'm knocking at the door. That's not what we're talking about. We're saying create an actual physical gesture of, oh, I'm reaching out to my friend. And now this is your first moment, and create a strong posture with it. Like your feet are, you know, very strong, and you're doing something with confidence because every single day your friend is there. So do it with confidence. I'm reaching out to my friend, and hold it. Now transition to whatever your next thing would be. Maybe in this case, you're feeling rejected. My friend isn't home. And so what does that look like? Maybe it's you curled up in a fetal position. Like, now move into that position. And so it's just this very interesting way of kind of diagnosing your scene and the emotional moments of it. And like, okay, now you've performed this thing through all 5 of your physical gestures. Okay, now do the scene again, keeping those in your mind. Don't actually do them, but now perform the scene thinking about those things. And it's incredible. Like, you would be surprised.
That's amazing.
Yeah, the way that these things impact, you know, your performance and your approach to a scene. Like, because now they kind of just creep into your physical posture. And yeah. Anyway, there's all of these little fun things that happen behind the scenes for actors that you would never guess. because everyone's more familiar with method actors and you're just becoming the person. There's so many other tools. And method acting is my least favorite. Like, I'll use it here and there, but for the most part, I like these other mental gestures and physical gestures and those kinds of things. Yeah. Anyway, so.
Wow. Awesome.
Boston. No,
great points, man.
But this other little thing I was debating if, we'd touch on, I'll link it in the show notes, but there is a real story of a guy who shows up to college. He shows up late, and I think he's in grad school or something, but he shows up late to class, and the professor had put on the board a bunch of these unsolvable problems, algorithms or whatever, that have no proofs. And then he was just demonstrating to the class that, hey, here's some problems that have yet to be proven. But this guy shows up late to class thinking that it's homework. And so he goes home and he solves the problems.
What?
His name is
Oh my God.
George Danzig. I'll link it in the show notes. But it's an incredible story. Like, he went on to be a very, well-known mathematician, as you would hope.
Yeah, right.
But it's just like, I don't know. It's an incredible story. I don't know if, Matt Damon took any inspiration from that or if it's just a coincidence. Because that was in 1986, I want to say, which is a decade before this film came out. But pretty cool nonetheless. Yeah. So...
Man, that's crazy. That just makes me think of just the power of the human mind to manifest things. Like the idea, I heard a story at one point, and it might just be like a folklore about somebody who was trapped in a he got locked in a refrigerated train car, right? And he froze to death.
Oh shit!
But the temperature wasn't below freezing.
What?
It was just literally because he thought he was in a freezer.
No way.
That he died. Right? And I don't know that is, I heard that, like secondhand. I'm not saying that actually happened, but like stuff like that happens all the time. This is a great example of, I'm expected to do this, so I got to figure out a way to do it. And then you just do it. But if that guy sat down and was like, okay, this is unsolvable, now I'm going to try to solve it, probably never solve it,
Yeah.
I don't know. If he's brilliant, he might have anyway, but it's just amazing. I love stories like that.
Same. Can't get enough of it. Yeah. Is there anything really left unsaid about Goodwill Hunting?
No, I don't think so, man. I don't think so. Okay. But except maybe, do you like apples?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna finish it.
Okay.
Leave that for Matt Damon.
Yep.
Yeah. Fantastic, man.
Yeah. Nicely done, sir.
You too.
One last thing, and this is just silly. There's this line of dialogue that I love because it's so simple in its implication, which is when he's trying to explain to Skylar how his gift works. And he's like, a piano, I just see, whatever, box of wood. But he's like, look, I can't paint a masterpiece. I probably can't hit the ball out of Fenway. And what I love about that is before he says that, he lists a few things that he probably can't do. He's like, I can't, build an Empire State Building, and I can't paint the Sistine Chapel, and I can't write the next great American novel, and I probably can't hit the ball out of Fenway. I love the probably.
Probably, yeah.
I love that because in him, that's such a Boston thing to say, in the sense that I love baseball and I think I could probably hit one out of Fenway Park. Like, it's such a, he doesn't want to admit that he can't, hit one out of Fenway, but he's like, hey, there's a chance. I probably can't.
Yeah.
It's just an indication of his internal, belief about himself with a baseball bat. I love that.
Yeah. I caught that too.
Nice.
That's great.
So, what are you going to recommend this week?
I'm gonna flip over to the Matt Damon train, just because I've loved so much of what he's done, everything from all the Bourne films and later and Ocean's 11 and stuff. I just think he's a fantastic actor. Obviously, Interstellar, we're big fans of that, But the next film, I think it was the next film he did, was Rounders, and I just loved that movie. Edward Norton's in that film, who is also an incredible actor. And there's something about gambling movies where the stakes are really high that I just I don't know. I just love that kind of like film and visceral kind of feeling that you get from those kinds of films. And I loved Rounders. I thought it was great.
This is such a tough one for me because on the one hand, they reference a story whenever Lambeau and Sean are talking about a guy named Ramanujan. And there's a film about that actually with Dev Patel. It's called The Man Who Knew Infinity. And it's solid. But even harder than that is there's a couple of other therapy films, projects. One is called In Treatment. That's got Gabriel Byrne, and HBO is about to revive it. And what's brilliant about that show is they would do it 5 days a week. For 5 days a week, they would air a new episode because it reflected his own treatments. Like on Monday, he had this one woman, and then on Tuesday, he had this teenage girl, and then on Wednesday, whoever, Irfan Khan, who's incredible. And then on like Friday, he was in his own therapy session with his own therapist. And now they're about to revive it, like with a new therapist and a whole new cast. And so part of me really, really wants to make sure people watch that. But I think I got to go with another film and this will be the one that you'll find in the show notes. It's called The Antwone Fisher Story. It's a true story. And it's written by Antwone Fisher. And it's, I want to say, Denzel Washington's first film that he directed. And I just think it's absolutely incredible. It's if you're looking for something else that has this Goodwill Hunting vibe, but is true and is like just maybe even 1,000 times more emotionally like impactful, you probably can't go wrong with the Antwone Fisher Story. So
wow, okay,
check that out. So stay tuned for next week. We're gonna do a film that we have been on tenterhooks for, called A Quiet Place 2. Could not tell you how excited we are for this. I know Todd is champing at the bit like a madman.
Yeah, baby.
So stay tuned for that. We'll be covering that. And then don't forget, subscribe, review us on iTunes. Leave us a note. If there's a film you want us to talk about, let us know. We'll probably cover it. In fact, after A Quiet Place 2, we are going to be covering a film that was requested by one of our reviewers. So if you really want to get us to cover a film, leave a review, 5 stars preferably. Someone hit us with another 1-star review. I don't know if our episodes are getting worse and this is how our listeners are communicating that to us or what. But no thanks.
1 star. Like you take the time to give 1 star. Damn.
Yeah.
Brutal. Whatever. Who needs you?
Yeah. And so seriously, if you haven't already left a review, we'd really appreciate you diluting our bad reviews. But whatever. If you want to leave us a note on this episode and talk about why this is or is not the best movie ever, or at least the perfect movie, because I wouldn't say it's my favorite movie of all time, though it may be one of the most watched by me. Anyway, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/goodwillhunting.
And our quote of the day is from Robin Williams, of course, this being the third in the trilogy we're covering right now. You're only given a little spark of madness. You mustn't lose it. It's so perfect for him, for all of us, but coming from him, it's so perfect. Yeah. He's the best. There's never been anyone like him. There'll never be anyone like him. And he had that madness, but it was like this madness doused in love, and you couldn't ever reproduce it. You couldn't ever manufacture it. It just is or it isn't. And it's wonderful for him to give that to people by saying we're all given a little spark. You got to find it and cultivate it and let it grow. It's a beautiful quote. I'm glad you picked this one.
Thanks.
You got nothing?
Nothing.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you. This has been so much fun, man. I really appreciate you allowing us to do this film. I know it's one of your favorites. It's fantastic, and it's the best way to go out on our Robin Williams trilogy there. So like Wes said, please review us, 5 stars preferably, or whatever you feel. No big deal.
Yeah.
And let us know if there's a film that you want to review, and we'll try to do our best to do it. And join us next week when we'll be covering A Quiet Place 2. Until then, I am Todd.
I am Wes.
Go watch some movies.
Tell me about your father.